Alright, so we're going to take a look at the SQL Server agent. From my knowledge, this allows you to create a job and have that job ran automatically. Within those jobs, you could write out SQL scripts. You also have the ability for the jobs to be ran at a set time schedule. And this is something I didn't even have planned when I was writing out this whole project. It's something that I actually came across because I was trying to automate the process of updating the tables in our database. Although I do not use SQL Server Agent to do that process, I actually found it to be useful in another case, and we're going to go over that now. I do want to say that setting up the SQL Server agent was pretty challenging as well. It took some time to get it enabled in the first place, and I had to come to the configuration manager. I've been in this menu before, but not for the SQL Server agent. There's been times when my SQL Server would not start and I would have to come here and automatically or manually start it. But for the SQL Server agent, I had to do the same process, but there's a couple more steps to where you have to specify which login you want to use in order to actually get it up and running. Not only do you have to do that, you also have to do a bit of coding to get the mailing system to work as well. So in addition that the SQL Server agent can run jobs and scripts, you could also send out emails. But if you want to, you have to do an additional step. And that took some time and research just to even get up and running. I won't go over how I got the emails to be set up in SQL Server and then automatically send out emails, but I could give a quick overview. You first have to allow your email to be less restrictive so that SQL Server can contact it, and that way it gives it the capabilities to send out emails automatically. You then have to enable the mailing system for SQL Server and as well enable the SQL Server agent in the configuration menu that I showed earlier. And then after that, you could then write your SQL scripts to use a mailing store procedure to send out data sets automatically. It's a lot easier said than done, and it probably took me several hours over the course of a couple days. And as I mentioned earlier, I did not even have this written down in my project planning. It's just something that I came across and thought it would be useful. Okay, so the first job we are going to take a look at is called deleting fidelity records. And you can see for the description here, it says deletes fidelity records so that the new fidelity data can be imported. And the reason we do this is because we are going to drop every row from the fidelity table and import it with the newest data. And because of that, there's a special way we have to go about this, especially if the table connects to other tables in our database. With this job, we have a SQL script. And this SQL script is going to run from Monday through Friday. But first, I want to show you the coding for that script. Using the agent here to view our T-SQL script is a little bit complex and confusing because they put all of the code in one line. So actually I'm going to open up the actual SQL script that I wrote and we could get a better look at it. Okay, so we have our T-SQL script open and you can see the coding is a lot more clearer now. So the first thing we are going to do is that we are going to specify which database we are using. This is pretty standard in SQL, and there's another way to specify it. You just have to click on the database in the left hand panel in the Object Explorer and it'll automatically set that database for you. But writing it out to me is the best way to ensure that you're using the correct database. So after that, we have two lines of coding that are grouped together, and they are going to no check the constraints for the fidelity benchmark table and the stock sector table. The reason that we do this is because if we want to delete every record from the fidelity benchmark table, If that fidelity benchmark table has any relationships with any of the tables in our database, we cannot delete every record because we will violate any primary key or foreign key constraints. But in SQL, there's a way that you could bypass this. And using the no check constraint all, what that will do is that will turn off the primary key and foreign key relationships for those two tables, for the fidelity benchmark table and the stock sector table. It'll turn it off and it'll remember those primary key and foreign key constraints. And with those relationships being off, we can now delete all the rows from the table. And that is due to the fact because since we have turned off those relationships, we are not violating any primary key or foreign key constraints. So once we have done that, we can now delete everything from the fidelity benchmark table. Once all of those rows have been deleted, we would then enable those primary key and foreign key relationships. Now, if we were to take a look at the table would be empty. We will only have our columns. But when we run our SSIS package, the data will be updated and this table, the fidelity benchmark table, will be populated again with the right primary key and foreign key constraints. And we do this because we need to delete rows from a specific table that has a relationship with other tables in our database. So now that we've gone over our T-SQL script, we can look at this schedule for this job. And you can see that it is going to occur Monday through Friday at 4:20 p.m. And we started this job back in October on the 26th. And before that, I had the fidelity table, already in our database. But the thing is that the table were not updated. And so I had to create this script to get those tables to delete the record and then populate it with the new fidelity data. So that is it for this job, and we can move on to the next one. The next job we are going to take a look at is called dividends. And we could look at the description for this one as well. So it's going to send the dividends amount, the stock symbol, stock name, and the date it was given out. So every time a company paid out a dividend in our database, I believe every 3 months, we are going to get an email sent to different emails that are my own personal emails, and it's going to send the output as a text file. And we could view the code in here as well. So in SQL or SSMS, you could actually send emails of datasets out coming from a query. Now this also took a bit of time to research and figure out how to get everything exactly I wanted to, and fortunately enough we was able to accomplish that. So looking at the first line of code, we are going to execute the login as the login for whenever I log into our databases or SSMS. We specify our login because I remember a while back I had a couple issues of actually getting the emails to send correctly, and so when I researched the problem, executing as login as the login we usually log in for SQL, this seemed to fix everything or fix a majority of our issues with this script. The next thing, we are going to execute a store procedure. This store procedure is basically like you're sending an email like you would maybe just a regular email or work email. And you can see we have multiple variables that we could use, and I'm going to go over each one in our script. So the first one we have is the profile name. Our profile name is the SQL Server agent operator that we created to get this whole thing up and running. Well, not really up and running, but to give us the ability to send out an email. So our profile name is Alexander Bernard. And this basically means who is sending out the email. So it's basically the from part in the email. Next, we have blind copy recipients. This is pretty cool to me because I didn't even know you could do this as well. Before the finalization of this script, I had it to a variable called to. And when you send out the email, everybody could see who it went to. So when I was researching the different variables you could use for this store procedure, there was something called blind copy recipients. And what this will do is whenever this script runs and send out the emails, nobody could see who else that email went to. But in our end, we could see who this email is going to. So these are my personal emails. I have a couple of them. And whenever this email gets sent out, those people who are on this blind copy recipient list will get those emails, but they cannot see who else received them. Next, we have the subject, and this is basically the title of the email, and we are going to name it as stock dividends. Then we have the body, what this email would contain, and it's going to basically say the same thing as our description. It's going to include dividends amount, the stock symbol, stock name, and the date the dividends was paid out. And then at the end of that email, it just has like a little PS note where it's best, and then it's just my name. Then there's a variable call, or parameter I should say, query. And this allows us to write out any type of SQL query or T-SQL script, and we could use it here. So we are going to specify the database we are using. So we are using stock_test, and we are going to execute our stock dividend store procedure. Then after that, we have another parameter. I should call it parameter from now on, called query result header. Before, when I was trying this whole procedure out, when I would get the emails, the data set would not include the header. So there's a parameter where if you set it to 1, you would have the column headers in the file that gets sent out in the email. After that, we have another parameter called attach query results as file. If you set this as 1, you are going to send out a file with the query results. And then after that, which makes sense, we have query attachment file name. And you can see I have it labeled as dividends.txt. You could also have it in the file format of a CSV and I think a XLXS, which is an Excel file. But for me, the text file was the best method to use. And then we have the last parameter called query result no padding, and that is equal to 1. I don't exactly remember what the issue was with this one, but setting this equal to 1 formatted our text file correctly in the way I wanted it to be. So that is this T-SQL script for this job. And after we go through all of the jobs, I'll show you the emails that I received from our database or from our SQL Server agent. And going to the schedules, you can see that this script or this job occurs every 3 months on the first day. And it's going to run this job at 7:15 p.m. Now the thing about these jobs, if you do not have your computer logged in or if the computer is powered off, these jobs won't run at all. So sometimes I have to remember to have my computer on for some of these jobs, or usually I just set up a display timer to where that the computer is on for 4 more hours after I last touched it. So that way that these jobs could still run without me being needed to log in. Okay, so now we could look at the next job that we have, and it's called stock gainers, decliners, and fidelity benchmark. So this job is a little bit more complex than the previous 2 jobs that we've seen. This job involves multiple steps and multiple T-SQL scripts. You can see the description for it. It sends out which stocks gained or declined. And I should also add the fidelity benchmark table. So you can see we have 3 steps here. So the first step is called stock gainers. And as you may know from earlier in the video, or just even by the name, this step is only going to produce the results for the stock symbols or the ticker symbols that have gained in the stock market for the current day. This also uses the SQL store procedure where you could send database mail, and it's going to follow the same concept that we seen earlier, but we are going to use the store procedure called stock gainers, and that's basically it. We change up the subject for it, call it stock gainers. The body is basically going to say end of day stock gainers, and then as I mentioned earlier, we specify which database we use, and then we execute our store procedure, and then we are going to output our data set as a text file as well. And just like the gainers, the stock decliners are going to do the same exact thing, but it's only going to show you where the stock symbols have declined for the current day in the market. So nothing really changed here. Maybe I added one or two more emails, but it's basically the same thing as the gainers, but change out gainers for decliners, and we are going to output that data set as a text file as well. The last thing that we have is called the fidelity benchmark table job, or the step. Basically the same thing as the previous two steps that we've seen. We are just going to execute our current fidelity benchmark store procedure and output that as a file and send it out as an email. After this job is completed, we could then tell the job to quit the job, or we could then tell SQL Server Agent to quit the job, and you can see that here on the last step. And this job gets ran Monday through Friday at 5:15. 5 o'clock is when our SSIS package is ran and our database is updated. So to give it a bit of room, I have it set to 5:15. And you can see the start date for this job was back in June on the 21st of 2020. And there's no end date in sight either. There's also a couple more things I want to mention that you could do with the jobs as well. So you could have alerts. I don't have any alerts set up here, but we could have notifications as well. So after this job completes, I will get an email to the SQL Server Agent operator that I set up earlier, telling me that the job is completed. And you could also have it send you an email whenever the job fails as well. So the next job that we have, and it comes in pretty useful, and I also did a bit of research on here, is called Stock Test Backup Subplan 1. This is just basically going to back up our database the first of every month at around like 10 o'clock a.m. or something. And the biggest thing for me is that I need to have my computer on by that time. So maybe down the road in the future, I may change the schedule of this, but for right now, it occurs the first of every month at like around 10. And this was the last job I created, and this is very important for me because if this database in particular crashes, then I'm losing a lot of time and effort and work put into this database. So it's always good to have a backup at least for each month in my case. So you can see the schedule for this job here. It is going to occur every first of the month at 9 a.m. and we had it set up on the 24th of June. There's also no end date for this one as well. And I do want to mention, I'm not an expert at SQL. This was just based off, researching different things and coming across new features in SQL that I didn't even know you could do, and thought it would be interesting to include it in this project. Although I may know how to write SQL scripts and do all types of different things, this section right here was particularly new for me because I've never done this before. So it was pretty good to include in the project, as I mentioned earlier. So the next job we have is called Stocks Not Found in Fidelity. And I also do want to mention again that this project is not perfect. There's some things that I have to continuously work on to get it to near perfection. But for right now, I think it's a good demonstration to show. So we have these stocks not found in Fidelity. This is basically the store procedure we seen earlier, where on the Fidelity website, when we run our Python script, it does not return every stock symbol. And so in that case, I want to send an email telling me which stock symbols have not been found in the Fidelity website when that Python script was ran. And just like the previous job, we are going to use the store procedure where you can send out an email. And it's basically going to follow the same format, but we are going to execute that store procedure, stocks not found in Fidelity. So this job is scheduled to run Monday through Friday, and we started it back on June the 21st, and it should occur at 5:16 p.m. That's really much it for this job. There's nothing really else to add here. The last job that we have is called the store procedure queries. And as you may guess from the name of the job, is that we are going to run a majority of our store procedures with this job here. This job I just have in here just so that all these store procedures can run, or majority of them can run. So we have 13 steps in this job, and after each step, it's going to go on to the next job until it hits the last one, and then it's going to stop. And these queries, or this job, is ran at 5:14 p.m. and we started it back in June on the 23rd, and it runs Monday through Friday. So I do not get an email for this. This is just running in the background for SQL, and that's just basically it. But I do get an email whenever the job is completed. So there's no data sets being sent out with this job here. And then the last job we have is, I think, a default job that SQL has in here. So we could take a look at our data sets now, or how it looks when it gets sent out in the email form. And as you can see with the operators, you can specify a name that you want to send the email as. So I have it sent as do not reply, but you can still see my email address. So if I were to create a new email address, it'll probably be better for a like Alexander do not reply at gmail.com email. But for right now, I also found this to be a feature and I thought it was pretty cool. So I just decided to try it. So our name in the SQL operator is do not apply whenever we send, do not reply, excuse me, whenever we send out emails. But taking a look at the data set that we have here, this is the Fidelity table. And you can see just as in text format that this table would be very hard to read. So the purpose of this and having these jobs send out different types of data set was to just have something to be automated to where it sends to different people automatically, and they could use it as their own data to plug into maybe some reports that they have or whatever else they would find this data useful for. When the agents send these files out as text, it isn't really meant to be taken at face value. You'll probably have to create a table or a graph with it to get a better understanding of what you're actually looking at. So the next email we could take a look at is the stock decliners. And again, you can see that it was sent at 5:15 p.m. And you can see that we have the open, close, the decline, the percent they declined in, and the date for it. And basically, as I said before, it isn't really meant for you to take at a face value with this text file, but more so to plug in maybe Excel or Power BI and use that to visualize your data. So now we're taking a look at the stock gainers. So in this particular day, it was not too good for the stock market or the stock symbols that I had listed in our stock symbol file list. And then we could take a look at the Fidelity benchmark table again. And you can see that the data is pretty messy here and just have to plug it into some type of software, Excel, Power BI, as I mentioned earlier. And you can see that it's going to be pretty consistent for the most part. You see December 18th, 17th, 16th, 14th, 10th. And like I said, it's only going to run from Monday through Friday. And you can also see this is another email of mine. This is another personal email. And it's the same case with this one here. We get all the emails that we have. You can see the gainers, the decliners, the fidelity benchmark table, and everything. So the only thing missing is that for my personal email that actually sends out these emails, I get an extra email telling me whether the job was successful or not and how long it took to run. But those are a couple of my personal emails that I get data sent to on a weekly basis. And sending out emails do not have to be the only thing. As you've seen before, we can have our jobs also alter tables for us, sort of like a pre-staging process in order for new data to be inputted to one of our tables.